people are really critical sometimes, especially in our field. You get a lot of different personalities who either don't believe in what you're doing, or I almost feel like they wish they would have come up with it themselves. And so they were looking for any way to kind of bash it. But I was able to turn those experiences into a more positive light.
Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. Today, I'm joined by Alexa Lobato. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Always a good day when I can record a podcast, catch up with friends. And this is a 2.0 episode. So Alexa is an OG. She was on episode 21, which I just looked. That was recorded September 25, 2019. And just for context, it's January 17, 2021. So we made it through 2020, and here we are now. So not to go into the whole backstory, but I got my master's with Alexa. Go Frogs. She was a year older. We always had awesome chats about kind of sports science. I was doing beach volleyball. She was doing soccer. And then she went off to do pro sports science and then kind of in a businessy startup. And I've enjoyed kind of staying up to date ever since. And I figured, why not? Let's talk business. Let's talk sports science, kind of putting it all together. So we'll start from the beginning, just your journey over the last, was it 20 months or so at a sports science startup?
Yep. So right after grad school, I got involved with FC Dallas. And then from FC Dallas, I hooked up with a few people who were looking to start a new company. And I joined them right out the bat. So I was actually at TSD under another individual. So I was kind of his second or right-hand man. But then he took another opportunity doing a little bit more coaching and applied athletic training. And so then I stayed at TSD and took over the director role. So I was at TSD about 20 months. Yeah, it was kind of crazy. I have since left the company, but it was a great experience. And I really got to thrive as an individual. Got to learn a lot. I got to connect and learn a lot more about business and marketing and how to create a product and identify a problem or an area that we can help improve. And so that's what I did. Yeah. So kind of a broad overview.
So let's get into kind of the planning stages, or kind of like the beginning. You have to understand the why, who's your target audience, kind of this like application context in mind. So could you kind of take us through like what you wanted the direction of the company to be, how that influenced what technology you bought, and then consequently your research and kind of just when it got to actually applying the stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined TSD when we didn't even have a logo. We had a name. They had one logo, but it had since kind of evolved. So I like to kind of say that it didn't have a logo. It was a blue box. So we evolved a little bit to like this hurricane. It was pretty cool. But yeah, there was this idea we wanted to collect baseline physiological and physical health in athletes. Some of the background kind of came from my CEO, his experience in the medical field, not having a lot of great sort of baseline data on healthy individuals. And so I thought, well, this is a great idea. What if we look into what it looks like for a professional athlete? And so that was like my forte. It was kind of my dream job, right? Blank slate, white piece of paper. He said, this is the kind of the idea. What do you think? What are your experiences? What did you learn in school? How can you apply it? And so it was great. So again, when I joined TSC, I was under somebody else. And so it was great to have that sort of critical thinking, that person right next to you to say, like, are you sure this is what we should do? What if we do it this way instead? What are the pros and cons of each way? And so to be able to talk it out and really kind of begin the process that way, I don't think that the protocols would have developed as they did without that. So I'm very, very grateful. So we, the other individual, myself, kind of identified a few pieces of technology that we liked. But before we could acquire any of those technologies, he left the company. So it's kind of up to me to decide, is this exactly what we want to do? Is this the best for the industry or for our product development? Is this what our customers need? And is it useful in everyday life? And so, yeah, it kind of all fell on my shoulders, which was great. But I mean, I definitely had to have a learning experience on how to kind of carry that weight. So it was great. I really enjoyed it.
Perfect. That leads me into my next question. So when this individual left and it was like, hey, you got to tell us, as the director of sports science, you got to tell us what to buy. You're going to like run it all. So like, how does one go about that process when it's like we have this end goal
Right.
and we know what we want to do with theoretical technology, to like idea to purchase to like making those protocols? Like, what was
Right.
that like?
So when I joined TSD, I joined in right before graduation, so closer to April or May. And so then I transitioned there full time after graduation. But I was accompanied by the individual for about 3 months, 4 months. So it was not even October when he left. So it's kind of like getting me trained up, and then he kind of threw over the reins to me. And so we didn't actually start utilizing the product and the protocols and have all the technology until, gosh, the beginning of the pandemic, which was like terrible timing, right? Because all this technology is so expensive, and they all have, year-long contracts or 3-year-long contracts. And so it was really important for us to hit the market really hard, really fast, just because we had to put so much money down if we're talking more of like the business numbers, right? So we wanted to get to market and get to have this flow of income as fast as possible. So I guess it's about March, and we got almost all of our equipment in. And yeah, pandemic hit, and I couldn't touch anybody. I couldn't invite anybody into our facility, so that was kind of tough. But it gave us a lot of time internally to me, I guess, essentially figure out that what exactly what I doing. How do I market to my audience? What are the things I haven't thought of yet? Let's bring in some sort of like test dummies. Let me just test the people in my office so I can kind of find those places where I was going to get hung up. So was it technology development? Was it our platform and our data aggregation system? Was it my protocols? Were they useful, or were they a little bit too in depth? Because that was kind of what I wanted to do, was this holistic approach to athlete health. But do I really need to test trap activation in a soccer player? So it really allowed me to dive into the research, really make sure that what I had put together was going to work, test it out a little bit, make a few adjustments before we really came to market. It also gave us some time to remodel the office, which was probably one of the best things we ever decided to do, because we just got comfortable in our space, and it was a lot more of this like cookie cutter office building. But when we had some time where we were looking to fill, and we decided to rip up the carpet and put down some really nice floor. So I was going to help improve my accuracy on the force plates. It was going to help, keep everything clean, especially now during the pandemic. Can I use, all these disinfectants and not, sort of ruin the carpet? So that was a great idea. We got to paint and put up our slogan, and it really was a great experience, I think, for all of us, kind of like a team building experience we didn't really expect. And so, yeah, so again, acquiring all this technology, it really kind of fell on my shoulders to almost be an expert in every single one. So it was great because I learned a lot. But it really helped with my communication skills with a lot of our vendors. So that was kind of a skill that I picked up I didn't even know I needed. And so if I came to you and I got this new podcast system, right, and I was like, this is so cool, it's the best in the industry, all the cool kids are using it, like, can you just give me the ins and outs of it really quickly? And then it kind of fell on my shoulders to not only do that, one, to reach out and ask for help, but then to document our conversations, and then to be really good about implementing it and reaching back out when I ran into some issues. And so we had 6 different pieces of equipment that I was having to navigate those relationships, keep a really good documentation of what our meeting was, what we need to do in the future, and then to keep track to make sure that they were doing the things that I had asked, or that I was doing the things that they had asked me to do. Yeah, so that was kind of how we navigated 6 different pieces of equipment. It was wild, so I had to stay really organized.
Perfect. And it's funny that you kind of mentioned all that stuff because I just released a YouTube video. One of my 5-minute sports sciences was just like learning new technology, and just as much as you get better at learning a specific piece of technology, you get better at learning how to learn new technology, and I've done it a ton,
Yeah.
mainly from TCU with Polar and Team Builder and just Excel and all that kind of stuff. And now we're I'm currently at. We got the Nord board and stuff like that, and having all these phone calls, and then you have to like as the sports science coordinator where I currently am, like, hey, we have this Nord board, and like you got to figure it out and teach all of us. And it's like, I'm supposed to teach you, like I got to teach myself first. But so it's something that
Yeah.
is super intimidating at first. And like, I can only imagine with the magnitude of your technology. And next, I want to go through briefly just like what they were to help give some context. But I remember when you would come to TCU and then you'd like set up all your stuff and you'd zap us and whatnot. But I think that there's so much value in like going and experimenting and doing yourself. Like when we got the 1080 Sprint, it's this $20,000 piece of technology. It can resist you, assist you. It spits out speed, time, force, and power at 330 hertz. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I ever? And it's just this one iPad. I'm like, how am I ever going to do this? You know? And then I literally just did like three like sprint workouts, you know, I guess
Yeah.
if I call it a workout. And I was like, oh, like this isn't too bad, you know? So I think that there's so much value in just like you hop on it yourself. You know, it's going to be awkward. You know, you're going to miss some stuff. But what's nice about the pandemic, you know, and some people are in less fortunate situations, but being able to like really take a step back, and whether it's kind of forced by COVID or just in general taking a step back, and like if you're in it every day with that technology talking with the same people, you know, there's some things that you would miss.
Mhm.
So I think that it's super important in this like kind of, it can be kind of dogmatic going through this process. You have technology and then you have results, methods, applications, and like all this kind of stuff to just be like, well, where would this get hung up, or what could I do better, or like I should have this one phone call and then I heard this one thing from this one person, I'm going to mess around with me, and then if I like it, then I'll mess around with my coworker, and then you know it's kind of just this snowball effect, and you just get better at learning new technology. But um so yeah, it was always cool that you just like zap me. But uh so the six pieces of technology, just very briefly, not to get too much in the weeds, but kind of just to help the listener just paint a picture in their head of like this crazy technology you were working with.
Sure. So we called it a lane. So essentially, if it's kind of just like this process of bouncing from one technology to the next, it had a really nice flow by the end of it. But we would start the athletes in what we called our passive assessment. So that just means that, like you said, I had to do all the work. I had to zap the athlete. I had to put them in the right position. I had to, stimulate the muscle and find, make sure that I was in the right place to get the best muscular contraction. So it really took a lot of effort on my part in those first four pieces of equipment. And that's what made TSD so unique was I built those protocols, specifically to be passive because of the experience I had working with athletes, and they didn't really know how the data was going to be used. And so I wanted to make sure that the data I was collecting was reliable and accurate without having to rely on somebody else to give their maximal effort. So the first four pieces of equipment, we started with an anthropometrics machine. So basically what that is body proportions. And so we were looking at limb length, limb circumference, we had a height and a weight and a body fat percentage. It was a really cool piece of machinery that we had kind of adapted from the more custom garment industry. And then we made it more medical. So it was really pretty cool. We were one of their first like medical clients, which was really fun. And again, kind of like the startup, right? For them, they were like so used to this like cookie cutter one lane sort of client. Then when we came around, like they needed to kind of sure some things up for me because I really needed to make sure that we had some discrepancies in the arm length on the left side, and they were pretty consistent. They were like got worse the taller the athlete. And so one to have identified that very quickly was, I kind of like did one of these, which I was like, crap, stinks that we're having this error, but like, let's find it. Let's communicate on how to fix it. But that was also a challenge too, was having to rely on somebody else to fix it, because this is my baby and I was able to have such a hand in every single piece of equipment, then to rely on somebody else to have to do that. That took a little bit of time and trust and patience. But that was our first one. So anthropometrics. And then we did passive muscle function. So we used a technology called tensiomyography. It was fantastic. So again, holistic. We did upper body, lower body, no matter what the athlete was. Again, passive to the athlete. And then we did range of motion, again, passively, mostly with our identifying the balance between flexibility and mobility and stability, and then having this baseline information so that if the athlete ever did get injured, we would have the healthy control on the same side as the injury instead of having to rely on the contralateral side if an injury occurs. And again, we use the same technology that a normal PT would use. We just use a goniometer. That way it would translate really well to what they were collecting in PT. And then the last passive assessment was ultrasound. That was really my baby. All the other technologies they had, these are the muscles you can test. But everybody kind of just picked the thigh when the thigh was injured, or picked the hamstring when the hamstring was injured, but they did never do a baseline. And so again, that's what TSD specialized in, was we want you when you're healthy, and we want to collect almost more data than you would expect, just in case this one crazy thing happens, right? So I always use the example of we had a soccer player at FC Dallas tear his pec, and it was like, okay, you're a soccer player and you tore your pec in the weight room, and we had no baseline data. It was all like lower body, right? Because you don't really use your upper body in soccer, especially in like a defender. So again, that was kind of why we built the protocols the way we did. And then, ultrasound, that was probably the most challenging in terms of learning and picking it up. It took the most reading because a lot of people, well, you kind of have to be certified sonographer to take really good images. But what really kind of set me back was I looked into becoming a sonographer. I had a lot of the prereqs, again, just because of, what we graduated with an undergrad and then a master's. But it was literally everything besides MSK. It was like, let's look at what babies need to look like. Let's look at the liver. And this is what happens when you do have to look at an ACL, or not an ACL, but like an MCL or a patellar tendon or an Achilles. Like, this is what you look at. But again, like being in the sonography field and learning more about it, it's like, okay, when you go to the doctor and they're like, okay, you need to get an ultrasound image. So they send you to a sonographer, and the sonographer asks you, okay, it's on your left side, where does it hurt? And essentially they just look at that one place. And so that, again, just goes against everything that we believed in. So I put together this really cool protocol using 4 different images on one ultrasound machine. And again, it was contralateral. We used both sides, or bilateral. We used both sides. And then we also did, everything from an elbow for like a pitcher. I had specific protocols for a pitcher. We did a really thorough Achilles assessment, which proved to be very, very useful and important, especially in our NFL guys. And then we had a thorough knee and shoulder assessment as well. So those were our 4 passive. And then the active side was some more traditional performance testing. We used a force plate, and then we used a stationary dynamometer system. So looking at how the athlete was moving and jumping in space, some inherent balance tests, and then an upper body plank test. And then the dynamometer system allowed us to look at, those sort of isometric maximal contractions. So again, we did shoulders, knees, hips, neck. I could do everything from like fingers. It was really cool. So yeah, this thorough assessment of physical health.
And my favorite part about kind of that whole story, talking about like the holistic approach, is if you have your why, like you understand the purpose of doing it all, and combining your experience plus the other investors and the other employees and the people above you, is like what has been missing in sports science, and like how can we be different, kind of put it all together. And
Mm-hmm.
as you were listing kind of a little bit more of the X's and O's, which I asked, it all kind of makes sense with this like context of, well, we know what injured stuff looks like, but like what does non-injured stuff look like, and what does it look like specific to that person?
Right.
So kind of when it comes time to, do I get my stenographer, is that the technical,
Yeah.
to get my stenographer cert, or to dive down this rabbit hole of XYZ? Well, it's like, will it help me in this like end goal,
Yep.
and like a stenographer cert, maybe something a little bit more traditional like PT, and then an MSK, I'm assuming that's musculoskeletal something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then you can like, you're consuming this like, baby ultrasound content, but you're understanding how to like change it and the truth behind it, even though it's not specific, you know? So I think it's super important to take a step back and be like, why am I consuming this? What's my end goal? And then consequently, like, what questions can I make you know, or do I have? And then who can I go ask about it? So I think that was a super cool kind of overview, tying it all together. And then next, a point that I want to touch on, because you made this all yourself, and it's super tough to get, or it's super easy to get stuck in this, oh, it has to be peer reviewed and it has to be official and important and I have to have all these letters. And one thing I believe, because maybe I'm a little bit more of like a rebel, like what's the point application, not super technical official,
Mhm.
is like, if it makes sense, if it's consistent, if it applies to you, and like you can justify it and you have as much information as there is out there, then like do it, you know? Whatever study it is that says like it takes 17 years for like research to actually be applied, well, it looks like you wouldn't be doing your job for another 17 years, you
Yeah.
know? So if you could kind of talk on navigating this fine line between like, yes, it has to be official and proven, but
Yeah.
also it's like, I can't wait that long.
Yeah.
So kind of when you were consuming this research, plus you had to answer to athletes, plus the people above you, plus
Right.
like all this kind of stuff, kind of navigating that fine line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Um, when you talk about it being like justified, I think that's a really good point. I got questioned from a lot of different people. And again, it was cool. Again, with the startup, you have to wear a lot of hats. And so there'd be one day where I'm testing a 13-year-old, right? And so they don't really know. I try to teach them about like how they have, do you know why it's called a quad? And they're like, I don't know, because I was like, there's 4 muscles. I was like, I'll teach you each one. And like, they literally don't care, right? But I feel like I'm trying to do my part and to like improve these athletes' health by teaching them about their body, right? And like having them care, like most of them actually don't. like, uh, but that was just kind of funny how you have to like justify it. But again, wearing lots of hats, go from a 13-year-old to talking to my CEO, who again was kind of in the weeds with me, to one of our partners who is an ortho guy, and he would ask me some really great questions, or I would ask him some questions about what he's seeing, in the OR, about when you talk to these athletes, what do you normally see? Like if he specifically was a shoulder elbow guy for the MLB, and so I said, do you notice anything else? Any other kind of like weird correlations with your athletes? And it could be that they were vegetarian or that they had flat feet, but it was always great to have that sort of insight from somebody who wasn't as bogged down in everything and all the data that I had. And so then I would go to talking to a professional athlete. And so I got a lot of like different views of what we were doing, and almost like contexts and what people liked and what they didn't like. And so instead of me relying on like an employee who sits next to me every day about asking me those questions, I really had to kind of find that within my sort of subject population and the people that I was exposed to. But allowing those conversations to help me justify why I was doing what I did was sort of a pivotal point for me, because they teach you in grad school, like nothing's really true unless it's proven, kind of thing. And then it's not really even true. We just say that it's mostly true, like that was super hard. And so I literally, in my desk, I had 2 file folders. And the top file folder, I got really organized by the end, right? I had every single one of our tests, so anthropometrics, passive muscle function, joint range of motion, ultrasound, and then so on. And they all had, multiple tabs with different research in it. And so, specifically the ultrasound one, that was insane to try to build. And I truly fell in love with the process by the end of the protocol building process, just because, it takes 17 years for somebody in a lab to tell you should do it. And then for somebody to apply it in real life, like I got to do that. I got to say this one person in Australia, found this cool way to measure elasticity in tendons, and they did it on 12 tendons in the lab, which is bonkers, right? Because I was testing 12 athletes a week essentially, and so that's 24 Achilles. Like I was doing as many as they published in their research. which was just like, wow, this is really cool. But I was applying their protocols in the lab. And so it was, again, staying really organized, not only in the research, but then in my protocol document about, you know, if somebody questions me on why I take a measurement the way I did, I had justifiable reasons, you know, right here that they could read, but also practical application, whether it be from this just worked better for me in terms of the process on the ultrasound. This was more comfortable for the athlete, but still follows the protocols, you know, justified or proven in research. And then this is something that we also realize that we should be looking out for from our ortho guy. And so again, just being able to justify it, I think, again, I like using the word that you used, because as long as I had a good answer for why I was doing what I did, it made people, I think, trust me a little bit more, like I had thought it through, even though it wasn't, you know, published and other people were doing it. You know, we're kind of pushing the envelope in sports science on this athlete monitoring and health. And we've thought through all of these sort of critical questions. So yeah, I hope that made sense.
Yeah.
Like a big
Yeah.
roundabout way.
And you kind of speaking through the three kind of justifications you had, and there's one that's like the technical, like I would assume that there's some research, hopefully on something you're doing, you know, but I would always say like, is someone going to tell me how to use Fusion Smart Speed timers with a group of 9 to 14-year-olds out at a grass field?
Yeah.
That's like not a thing. So I just have to go and do and figure it out, you know?
Yeah.
But the second one is like I've just been there and done that, and this is what I found has worked and hasn't worked, and I've had conversations with those athletes, and I think that that's probably the most important one, where it's like, well, what's the point of even having justifications in the first place? And that's to help you do your job
Mhm.
at TSD with your athletes, with your technology, with your specific end goal, you know? So like of the three, I would say that that's the most important. But then also is these like outside conversations of these experts, you know, to help you kind of get to think outside the box.
Yeah.
And if someone just spits out like research study after study after study, it's like, okay, but like what did you do, you know? So it's like it's this fine line between people want the research, but like if you have all of it, then they're like, well, anyone can go and find those, you know? So it sounds like if you have those three things, the technical, the official,
Mhm.
the anecdotal, plus just like the conversations, whether it's the people that are the world experts or the people of that company, I think that that's not bulletproof, but that's a pretty good place to start. And like you said, having those conversations with the variety of stakeholders, I'll use a technical term, the
Yeah.
athletes, the CEOs, whatever,
Mhm.
then they just start to believe you more. But if you're thorough and you have all these different ways to help kind of create these justifications and protocols, I think that's an awesome process. And the next question, so I'm excited for this one.
Mhm.
You have your magic wand and you can zap me and the listener one of those 6 technologies
Ooh.
just magically. If you could zap all of us one of the 6, what would it be and why?
Hmm.
You have
I
to
don't
wave the wand when you answer.
I know. It's kind of a trick question. Gosh, I don't know. That's really hard. It's hard because um, I guess the protocols are so interconnected and correlated with one another. It's hard to have one and not the other. So,
2 of
I
6. Does that
guess what,
help? 2 of the 6. Does that help?
two of the six. Gosh. I guess the ones that really were cool for me. Okay, we'll start with the one because I can make up my mind. Ultrasound. Like I have just totally fallen in love with ultrasound. I mean, it has its downfalls and it has its challenges because everything's black and gray. And honestly, the LCL for me is like so hard to find. Like I spend so much time trying to find an athlete's LCL. They're like, "Are we done yet?" I'm like, "Can you wait like one more minute?" I'm like trying to make sure I'm measuring the right thing. I don't know why I like always get hung up on that one. And I know what to look for in terms of like bony landmarks, but I don't know if it's just like this little skinny thing that I just overlook all the time. But man, that really hangs me up. But I just love the potential for ultrasound. And I feel like it's the most underutilized piece of equipment that we have in the medical system. Um, People go in for an MRI all the time and it's great. But a lot of time they might not find anything and they've just exposed themselves to radiation. It's really expensive. Usually you can only have so many a year. So if you use it up on, this sort of fluke accident that you don't really find anything, they don't like to prescribe a lot of MRIs throughout the year because of the obvious reasons. But then ultrasound, I mean, it's relatively low cost compared to other imaging systems. The reliability and validity of the images that we see, dependent on the sonographer again, but like high class, right? Gold standard. um, and then it's just so underutilized. I feel like we have so much yet to learn about healthy structures. And that was kind of my passion again, was to identify a good way to track change in healthy structures. Is it just tendon diameter or AP length of the Achilles tendon? Like, no, like let's look at all the structures. Let's look at all the surrounding tissue. Let's take all these specific measurements again that are accurate and reliable and reproducible so that I can do it over a long term. And so it just worked really well. Even though it was kind of a longer process within the protocol as a whole, especially when I got tripped up on the LCL. But other than that, I mean, I just love it. I think it's so cool. So cool. So there we go.
LCLs are a placebo. They're fake.
They're fake. They're definitely not fake, but they're really hard to find. Really hard to measure.
I love saying that like things are a placebo just cause maybe it's like my nerdy mind, but like if anyone's kind of just like going down a little tangent or rabbit hole, I'll just like say it's a placebo. And like how awesome is it that like someone has that science mindset that like they think that's funny. So I think
Yeah.
science jokes are definitely my favorite. But LCLs, placebo, wave the
Yeah.
wand. But so what would you combine of the other 5 with the ultrasound? Or would you change your answer because it's a combo now?
Yeah, if I had to choose 2 of the other ones to combine, it would probably be the passive and the active muscle function. Because again, I think that's so underutilized. And
The zapper?
yes, so tensiomyography and then just a dynamometer, stationary dynamometer
Could
system.
you could you describe tensiomyography for the because I know what it feels like, but like
Yeah,
for the listener?
sure, absolutely. So it uses a TENS unit. So for those people who've been to PT, probably know what a TENS unit is. But it's just electrical stimulation via this like little box, the little TENS unit, and so it allows your muscles to activate without the neural control. And so what happens, this is kind of the process of TMG. I identify the muscle belly, so dependent on anatomical structures. So the bicep is always the easiest one. So up at the shoulder, down towards the elbow, and then you measure a certain distance between. And then that's where I place my displacement. It's about 3/4 of the way towards the elbow, if we're talking pretty general. And so from there, I can place a little 2 sticky electrodes around the displacement sensor. And then again, it's up to me to stimulate the muscle via the machine. So what basically happens is, you start down about 20 millivolts, and then you work up about 15 to 20 millivolts each sort of rep. And then on the screen, I'm watching the muscular contraction. So the displacement sensor sitting on the muscle belly itself is actually measuring the time it takes for the muscle to be stimulated. It'll measure how long it takes for the muscle to relax after it's been stimulated. It measures how much of a displacement we get from the actual muscle belly itself. And then once I get 2 waves that look exactly the same, I know I'm at max. So for me, I think I was about, 60, 65 millivolts on my bicep. And then for a lot of our bigger guys, I mean, I was getting up 70, 75, 80, which is a lot higher, but depending on muscle mass, lean mass, or fat mass as well, kind of dependent on how much stimulation they actually needed. Less concerned about how much the stimulation was and more about just the curve itself. And so I like to pair the passive muscle function, so taking the human element out of, how is your muscle functioning, and then pairing it with how does it function when you tell it to function. I thought that was really cool, and something that not a lot of people had done, especially in the research. And so that's why we named it what we did: passive muscle function and then active muscle function as well. And so I think those are a really cool pairing and have a lot of opportunity to kind of say or identify what's lacking within the individual. And so we saw a lot of really cool correlations. And then it allows us to identify tightness within the muscles, not only function, but also how the muscle was moving essentially through its range of motion. So kind of cool.
Awesome, awesome. And then last kind of question, we'll wrap up here. So I always like bringing stuff full circle, and I've changed how I do my podcast since you'll be episode, I think, 89. Or was that 60 episodes, 67, 8 episodes ago? So I've kind of changed it, but I really enjoy the theoretical, not the X's and O's, because like I think that's kind of overhyped. It's important, but like these stories and experiences are like that's the coolest stuff of all of this. But I do like bringing it full circle into like, well, at the end of the day, we're all here to become better practitioners, right? So how do your stories and experiences help us become better practitioners? So if there was like kind of one or two things in your sports science startup experience over these last 20 months that can help me in, let's say, a little bit more, I mean, traditional is relative because I don't have a very traditional job, but in this sports science context, to let's say a college or a pro or a private company, someone that like handles technology. So whether it's like a mindset or like a tip or just like one or two things that the listener can do this next week when they're like messing around with kind of all of their data from this like startup experience.
Sure. That's kind of a hard question. I feel like there's so many things. Because the two things that came to mind were the ability to adapt. I think that was like really important, especially in the startup realm. Not only in the sense of the science, but also kind of my audience as well. I had to, again, wear a lot of hats and be a lot of different so not necessarily people, but have a different perspective depending on who I was looking at. And so that was really important. But then also too, like I think we kind of hit on it where um, people are really critical sometimes, especially in our field. You get a lot of different personalities who either don't believe in what you're doing, or I almost feel like they wish they would have come up with it themselves. And so they were looking for any way to kind of bash it. But I was able to turn those experiences into a more positive light. So although people were being critical and saying, well, why did you do it this way? It's too long. You have to wait too long to collect so much data because otherwise I don't believe it. We don't need it. We've made it this far. Why do we need it now? But it allowed me to kind of stand up for myself, not only in like a personal sense, but in a business sense where I say, okay, well, we've identified this really great opportunity and athletes and a product that people really need. And not every single person is going to fit into that box. Technically they can, but whether they want to fit into that box is totally fine. But again, it allowed me to kind of stand up for not only myself, but the product. So as much as you need to be able to adapt to your clientele or who you're talking to, or be a little bit more flexible in the protocols and learning, right? You also, on the flip side, have to be very stern and believed in what you're doing. Otherwise, people aren't going to either. So it's kind of this delicate balance. And that's become very apparent in the startup world because every day is so different. Every day is so different, so different. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you've done your research and not necessarily research like peer reviewed stuff, but research in regards to looking through your own numbers plus having all of those phone calls, and I've had plenty of those, but all
Mhm.
those phone calls and like you have these like protocols and processes and justifications, as well as you understand who your end goal target audience, what the point is, you can be solid enough because you have that background in saying this is what we do, here's why we do it, but then also you know it well enough to where you can tweak it and where you probably shouldn't, and then it kind of like all goes together where it's like if you know your stuff you can kind of figure it out, not
Mhm.
to like make that oversimplified. But I think over the course of 45 minutes or whatever this was, kind of just going through beginning to middle to end on like, okay, well, here's our goal. Okay, well, we have all of this stuff, but that's not really like what people have done with this before. So like, how do we make it ours? But then how do we make it ours, but also for this other situation that's ours, and kind of putting it all together. So I'll go back to something I said earlier where it's you get better at learning how to learn technology. And it is intimidating. And I've done it so many times where I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how am I ever going to like feel proficient? And then
Yeah.
here I am like making YouTube videos about how to like, learn this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a process. And like you just gotta go and do and get your hands on and then just like know why you're doing it and then talk it through and write it down. And yeah, so thank you for sharing. Is there anything else? I'm opening the floor up to you. You can finish up whatever you want to say. You can plug whatever you want to plug. Floor is yours.
No, no, this has been great. Been a pleasure talking with you. Again, yeah, we've kind of come a long way since last time we spoke. So I look forward to doing it again soon.
Maybe a 3.0. So I'm gonna say thank you very much, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Take care.